Welcome to lecture number 6. Today we will explore the major causes of the American Revolution, which resulted in the independence of the United States in 1783. This lecture will address several themes. First, it will explore the roots of the French and Indian War and show how tension developed between the English and the colonists after the war. Secondly, the lecture will investigate the series of policies adopted by Parliament which led to this tension. Finally, it will trace some of the important events and battles which took place during the Revolutionary War. We'll begin with the concept of European rivalry and background to the French and Indian War. As you can see from this list below, the colonial era is characterized by a great deal of warfare. These were world wars. Fighting took place not only in North America, but on other continents. The wars primarily involved England and France as they fought over control of North America, but Spain was also involved. This map identifies the regions occupied by the French, Spanish, and British as of about 1750. Notice the vast purple area on the map indicating areas under the influence of the French. As the 18th century continued, British and French spheres of influence came into conflict with one another, which led to warfare. The first segment of this lecture will address most of its focus on what was clearly the most important of these wars, the French and Indian War, as well as the competing claims of both the French and English in North America. This slide was originally shown in lecture number 2. French claims to North America began with the explorations of Jacques Cartier. In the 1530s, he explored the St. Lawrence River and sailed to what is now Montreal. This slide, also from lecture 2, chronicles the actions of Samuel Champlain, the father of New France, who had a tremendous influence on the fur trade. We'll now identify 2 additional Frenchmen whose actions added to French claims in North America. The first of these Frenchmen would be the explorer Robert de La Salle. In 1682, he paddled the full length of the Mississippi River, claiming it for the French crown. Once he reached what is now New Orleans, he named the entire region Louisiana in honor of his king, Louis XIV. The arrows on this map point to different segments of the Mississippi River. He wasn't the first Frenchman to travel down the river. Louis Joliet and the missionary Pierre Marquette traveled as far south as Arkansas, but they went no further. La Salle was important because he traveled the entire distance of the river. The other important individual was Antoine Cadillac. He came to New France at the age of 25 and was involved with the fur trade. He was important because he founded the city of Detroit in 1701. The actions of these 2 men served to enhance French claims to the interior of North America. The arrow here points to Cadillac's Detroit. While you can clearly see in this map that the French had an area of influence which was quite large, the population of the French in North America paled in comparison to that of Britons. Britain's demographic advantage in North America was quite clear. In 1700, there were approximately 15,000 French colonists living in North America, as opposed to about 250,000 non-Indians living in England's colonies. By the middle of the century, there was a dramatic increase in the number of French colonials. They had quadrupled in numbers. However, the British advantage was reinforced during the same era, as the number of colonists increased to about 1.17 million. A great deal of time has already been spent in previous lectures chronicling the early histories of several English colonies. However, there's one characteristic which might be interesting that addresses the changing nature of colonial populations over the course of the 18th century. As you can see from these charts, in 1700, English and Welsh settlers made up 80% of the population, while by 1755 it was barely a majority. This came about due to a heavy increase in the number of German and Irish immigrants and a doubling in the size of immigrants from Africa. We'll now investigate some of the specific events associated with what was known in the colonies as the French and Indian War. A good place to start is with the simple definition of terms. Fighting in the French and Indian War began in 1754 and the war ended in 1763. It involved the French and their Indian allies fighting against the British and their Indian allies. In Europe, the war was called the 7 Years' War. Now, you may be saying to yourself, why in the world was it called that? The war lasted for 9 years. Well, fighting started in North America in 1754 and spread to Europe by 1756. Overall, the war ended with a peace treaty which was signed in 1763. To be honest, I didn't name the war. I'm only here to talk about it. The first battle took place at Fort Duquesne in the hotly contested Ohio Valley during the summer of 1754. Fort Duquesne was located at the confluence of 3 rivers near modern-day Pittsburgh. It was strategically significant as the river systems were the highways of the 18th century, and control over this location would facilitate influence over the entire Ohio Valley. The valley itself was significant as colonists, the French, members of the Iroquois Confederacy, and Indians already living in the region each had competing claims to the area, which was rich in hunting lands and fertile soil. A young officer from Virginia attempted to force the French to leave the area in 1754 and was forced to surrender. The young officer was George Washington, and he surrendered, ironically, on July 4th. The next year, the British responded by sending experienced General Edward Braddock to the colonies, who led a force of over 2,000, which included British regulars as well as Virginians, against the French at Fort Duquesne. This resulted in a humiliating defeat for Braddock and his forces. Braddock himself lost his life. The first years of the war went poorly for the British, but fortunes changed over time. One turning point was seen with the successful siege of the French fort of Louisbourg in 1758. The victory at Louisbourg was strategically important as it gave the British control over the Gulf of St. Lawrence as shown by the arrow on this map. Thereafter, it was difficult for the French to transport supplies to Canada. Following a stunning attack on the Plains of Abraham by British General James Wolfe, Quebec fell to the British in 1759, as depicted in part by this image on the left. After the fall of Quebec to British forces, France's defeat in North America seemed to be certain. However, fighting did continue in Europe and other parts of the world. A peace treaty was eventually signed by all parties in 1763. The French were hurt by the fact that they were outnumbered so dramatically by the English colonists. However, their efforts were also damaged by the changing alliances involving Indians. For decades, Native Americans, particularly the Iroquois, were successful diplomats who played European powers off against one another. Up to 1758, there was a tendency to side with the French, but things changed in that year. The Iroquois accurately judged the balance of power was shifting toward the British and made sure they were on the winning side. The image from an American magazine shows an undecided Indian warrior in between a Frenchman and Englishman, each offering presents. The message: whomever offers the better gift will receive the assistance of Native Americans in the Ohio Valley. In many ways, 1763 is a turning point in American history because this was the year in which the peace treaty ending the French and Indian War was signed. It was important because one of the most important results of the war was that France lost almost its entire overseas empire. Here we are, back to that map of North America at about 1750. The purple sections indicate areas controlled by the French before the French and Indian War. There is very little purple on this map showing spheres of influence after 1763. Neither the French nor British wanted the other to control Louisiana, so this was ceded to Spain in 1762. The British clearly emerged as the dominant European power in North America. Practically overnight, Canadian citizens, a large majority of whom spoke French and were Roman Catholic, became subjects of England rather than France. The French cultural heritage is still seen today primarily in eastern provinces like Quebec. Finally, Native Americans also became big losers as they lost the ability to play different European powers off against one another.